Welcome, everyone, to another Uncle Bobbie's virtual author event. We are so thankful to have these amazing authors talking about an amazing book. And we've got a wonderful panelists here to get into a really great discussion. So thanks to everyone who came out or is coming to sit in to the computers. We're not going to miss any time, so we're going to be getting into the book discussion, and then that'll be around 30 to 35 minutes. Afterward, we're going to have our audience live Q&A, in which point I would like everyone to submit their questions to this side chat bar so that we're all able to see them. You are able to purchase the book that we're talking about tonight, Punching the Air, by clicking the green button that you see below. That will take you directly to our Uncle Bobbie's bookshop online. Okay, without further ado, I would like to introduce the authors of the book Punching the Air that we're talking about tonight. We have the New York Times bestselling author and the National Book Award finalist, Ibi Zoboi, and the co-author were the prison abolitionist and activist, Dr. Yusef Salaam of the Exonerated Five. They are tonight here in discussion with Keir Bradford-Grey, and she's the Chief Defender for the Defenders Association of Philadelphia. Please join me in warmly welcoming them all. Okay, we got 1, 2, and 3. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Thank you all so much for being here.
How's everything?
Get into this. I will just let you go.
Very nice, very nice. Well, I want to start perhaps with a reading from the book. This is called Clone. Ever since that day in the fifth grade, my teachers watched me so hard, so close, that I felt like I was trying to break out of prison, even though it was just school. Every dumb thing I did, they thought it was because of trouble at home, an absent father, a tired mother, not enough books, not enough vegetables, not enough sleep. They believed those lies about me and made themselves a whole other boy in their minds and replaced me with him.
And we're going to read Dust together. What page was that, Yusef?
181.
181, yes. This is Dust. They can't kill you in here, but they will try, Umi says from across the round table. That's the point. Locking you up isn't enough for them. They will try to crush your spirit until you're nothing but
Dust. We both say together.
And what does dust do, Amal? What did Maya Angelou say about dust? Umi asked.
It rises, I whisper.
You got to say it loud enough for me to hear it, baby. Loud enough for you to believe it.
Dust rises, I say, loud enough for it to ring in my own ears. She takes both my hands and squeezes them. But I pull away from her. Don't call me baby, not in here, not now. I say loud enough for her to hear. Those guys didn't touch my face, so she doesn't know how my insides have already turned to dust. And it can't rise because it's trapped here in my belly.
Amal, no matter how tall you grow, no matter how thick your beard, no matter how deep the bass in your voice, you were first my baby boy, grown into a young man, growing into a man, becoming an elder, transitioning into an ancestor, evolving into spirit, turning into breath, easing into life. You are my life and you are life itself, Amal.
What I don't say, Umi, you gave me life. You, and these words are stuck in my throat like stone. Everything I don't say to Umi becomes a mountain, becomes a country of unspoken things. What I actually say, you don't have to come here so often. I know it's hard. I know it's a long trip.
How dare you say such a thing, Amal? You are not alone in this fight. I'm here with you always. Your struggle is my struggle. Your hurt is my hurt. I'm hurting because you're hurting, Amal. And that was a conversation between Amal, 16-year-old Amal, and his Umi.
Yeah.
And that scene is actually inspired by Yusef.
That's
and
awesome.
his mama and his Umi, Yusef Salaam.
Well, one, I thank you for reading those verses, because I really think that this is such a wonderful intersection of not just what Amal went through, but also what his family went through while he was struggling with this dichotomy. But before we get into some of the book, I really want to talk to you, Dr. Salaam, and you, Ibi, if you don't mind me calling you that, about what was the purpose of this book? How did the two of you come together and say, we want to do a book that describe this journey in this fashion?
Well, it starts with me. Well, it starts with Yusef. Yusef, of course, went through that terrible tragedy at 15. However, where I come in is when I met him in college in 1999. And he had just been released from prison. And he walked into our college classroom. He actually came looking for our professor, Dr. Marimba Ani. And the class was African Civilization. And he walked in, and a few minutes passed, and we found out that he was the Yusef Salaam of the Central Park 5 jogger case. And we were all New York City kids. We grew up in New York City. Everybody knew about that case. Everybody remembered it. And many of us in that classroom believed that those young men were innocent. And in he walks, taking a college class just 2 years after he was released. And I wanted to interview him for my college's newspaper because I was an editor for that newspaper. I never got that interview, but we did end up talking for a long time. So much so that I never forgot that conversation, and I never forgot him, of course. I continued to follow the case, but I ran into him 3 years ago at a book festival where he was selling his self-published book of poetry, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah, I think there was an initial desire at that point when we decided that we wanted to work with each other, really to tell my story. But I was actually in contract with Netflix and Ava DuVernay and everybody, and we were telling the story behind the scenes with the actors and actresses that were going to be portraying us. And so with Punching the Air, the great thing about Punching the Air is that it is a work from us that allows us to dive into fiction and really tell the story of the criminal system of injustice from a perspective of me having gone through that. And I love the way that Ibi always says it. This becomes the 2020 version of me, a 15, 16-year-old child, but without the flat top, but now with the way that young people may wear their hair today, and how that experience kind of plays itself out, not necessarily just through these kind of cases that they want folks to believe are anomalies, but how this is a part of the fabric and the fiber of the criminal justice system. This is the system that I will only echo the words of the Attorney General in Kentucky. I forget his name, but it doesn't matter at this particular point. Right. But what he said, which was really interesting, was, and the only thing I will echo, the only thing that I will agree with in terms of what he said, this is a criminal system. And I was blown away when I heard that. I couldn't believe that he was saying that. But when you look at all of the oppression that we've had a front row seat to, right? 31 years later, the Central Park jogger case is still on trial because we are kind of trying to examine, how is the system this way? Why is systemic issues still the law of the land? Right. How do we and how do we fight this? How do we finally come into a feel-good space of the kaleidoscope of the human family that Dr. King mentioned in the I Have a Dream speech? And that's by us doing this work that's so important and so paramount to all of our lives, because everything that we do matters, and everything that we are doing is built upon everything that has been done.
So Punching the Air, I think, is so masterfully titled, because sometimes when you feel like you can't do anything else but punch the air. That's what where your rage goes. But in this story, Amal's journey takes him through so many transformations. And so with that understanding that you can be bigger than your circumstance, and if you have the tools, what target audience do you expect for this book to reach? And what do you expect for them to get out of it?
Well, yeah, I mean, Evie and I, we've always said that this is for folks from 8 to 80, you know. We you know,
say rhyme, don't cripple and crazy, but you know.
Well, you know, we named the character Amal on purpose because the word Amal means hope in Arabic. Mm-hmm. And Shahid is a word that means witness, which is very interesting because, you know, when you can witness atrocities, when you think about, say, for instance, the lynching memorial in Montgomery, Alabama, that the Equal Justice Initiative has kind of shown the world, the lynching memorial, the legacy museum, you know, a lot of that data was captured because people were writing down and keeping records of where people were being lynched, you know. And so they were the witnesses of those times, so that at some point in the future, we can then tell the world about the atrocity of what happened. You know, one of the things that happens in the American criminal system is what Dr. Angela Davis said when she said, we as a people have historical amnesia. And so in the communities that we come from, in the Black and brown communities, in the marginalized spaces of the world and really of America, there's this idea that has been planted in the mind and heart of a people. And that idea is that we're going to be dead or in jail before we reach the age of 21.
Yeah.
And to fight against that comes our book, Punching the Air. It is really the water for the seeds of greatness inside of everyone, to let us know that we have to be our own saviors. We are the hope of ourselves and also of the world. We are our ancestors' wildest dreams, you know. And the challenge that Amal goes through is a really, really powerful challenge, because as the reader reads what's being said and what's being given, they get the opportunity to realize that there are layers of discovery that is happening. And just as we begin to move forward in our lives, especially in life now, I think is so different than it was yesterday. Yeah. Yesterday, it was like, oh, you know what? Let's just go along to get along. Let's join this and join that. And, you know, we were happy, as Kanye West said, when they called him Sane, I don't know, Saint West, you know, but when he was considered more sane, he said, even if you're in a Benz, you still are in a coupe. Mm-hmm. Because the concept was that you're still riding around in their system. You're still appreciating their system, even though you have, you know, cordon bleu and, you know, fine air and all this other great, crazy stuff that people aspire to. But all people should be able to appreciate the finer things in life, the idea of a democracy that America affords.
Yeah. But in this book, I mean, it really, while these stories may seem foreign to people outside of the system, we know how common that these are. And so to take a young boy and show how demoralized he was, and then to show his redemption, self-reflective redemption through these stories, like how do you expect for this book to really help transform minds? And again, the target audience, I see it as being a younger audience. And I'm really hoping that we can figure out how to get this more so into the mainstream of their hands, more so than their computers and what they're seeing in social media. Oh, I think your mic is off.
I keep doing this. As I mentioned before, I was an aspiring journalist in college, and I wanted to help Yusef tell his story. And as we do more and more of these talks, we're realizing that he was just not ready to tell his story. Only 2 years after being released, and the world thought that they were still guilty. The true culprit had not come forward yet. And of course, he had not yet been exonerated. And I still wanted to tell that story. But over the years, I I moved away from journalism and went into writing for young people. I got an MFA in writing for children and young adults because I wanted to be able to tell a certain kind of truth to young people, because they are, they're vulnerable and malleable at that age. There are certain things certain seeds you could start to plant in the mind of a 5-year-old or a 12-year-old or a 16-year-old. And I have books published and will have books published in that entire age range. So interestingly enough, when I met Yusef, we wanted to tell his story, but I still wanted to tell the 15, 16, 17-year-old story, not the man that you see now. I personally wanted to focus on the child so that the world does not forget that at 15, you're still a child. Mm-hmm. I'm a parent of teenagers, and I'm seeing how young 15 is. There's some hygiene things that they still haven't figured out,
I have those 15-year-olds here in my house. Yeah.
Right. And when you really sit with that idea to think about what those young men were accused of doing, it's mind-boggling when you sit there, right? Sit in that moment of 15. Was it Kevin who was in middle school?
Yeah.
Right. And to really step back and think about how the world perceives Black children and how that goes into everything that they do in terms of creating a narrative of who Black people are, this sinister, hypersexualized child in the imagination of any white person. So the reason why we, of course, I had the skills to tell it from the perspective of a child so that we remember 15 and 16. But another thing was that Yusef was hyper aware of his, of society at 16 because of the poems that I read that he had written while he was incarcerated. So all of that, yes, this can be taught in the 6th grade and 7th grade. To think about, and especially in classrooms where there are Black children, for teachers to understand this is a 12-year-old boy. You might see him as a 20-year-old man in your imagination. Right. But what is it about children? What is it about Black children that you can't attribute childhood characteristics to that Black boy or that Black girl? What is it about in your imagination that you can't seem to wrap your head around? This is an innocent child. Why aren't we given the benefit of innocence and imaginative play and having dreams and wanting, the tenderness of like a mother's love or, all the things that are in Punching the Air was intentional to make him a sensitive boy, a boy who would cry. We don't know if he cried. He won't tell us if he cried, but I know that he cried. I never asked Yusef, did you cry?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Only in the dark. There's a certain specialness and so there's a certain sacredness to that, right? Because as people begin to vicariously read the book, as people read the book and vicariously walk and put themselves in the shoes of all of the characters. Mm-hmm. That characteristic could be the teacher, the special character witness, the officer. It could be Amal himself, right? Mm-hmm. Or Don. It could be any one of those folks. It could be the mothers. It could be the uncles, the grandmothers, the community, right? As we begin to vicariously look at this and have it speak to us, there's a certain specialness that happens. And that certain specialness is that psychosocially, when you pour into a child and allow that child to be and to tell that child that they matter, they move in life like they matter.
Right. That's
a certain overcoming that has to happen, right? Because the world is telling young people, you're not worth nothing. But young people are the caretakers of tomorrow.
Right. Yeah. I want to ask, I love that we're talking about this in terms of being seen, because where I work, I see a lot of young kids coming into this system and they're not seen for the innocence that they have, but instead they are looked at as older, more mature, more culpable, and more susceptible to the type of punishment and treatment that they can be resilient for later on. And we're seeing the opposite, right? We're seeing a destruction of our youth. We're seeing a destruction of some of our kids in terms of the hope that they need to have, that we want them to have, that our parents wanted for us. The system has yet to atone for that. How do we start to reckon with what we have done to our youth by bringing them in this system that is supposed to rehabilitate them, but instead wipes out any opportunity that they have to look at themselves as normal?
I think we have to, and I'm trying to answer your question from the space of being one of the oppressed and not the people doing the oppression. I'm also trying to answer your question from the space of being a person who has gone through the system and is now understanding that we have to do all that we can do, because in this marathon of life, it's not about the short game. It's not about thinking that we haven't gone anywhere because we've only made incremental changes, but it's about understanding that we have to become the new Nipsey Hussles of the world. We have to be able to give people the knowledge and information that you can take into your life, into your deoxyribonucleic acid, the baton of that is being passed to you that does not have to include generational curses. And I think that part of responsibility comes in the form of people who understand what's at stake, right? Because it's no longer about us looking at this game of life and saying, oh, we just playing checkers. No, we've been playing chess. We've been playing checkers, but they have been playing chess. And now we have to be able to play chess, and we have to become quick studies and become masters of this game. Because the worst part about it is that, real or imagined, if we look at the Willie Lynch letter as an example, we find out that the things that are discussed in that document are things that we can look into society and see are being played out. And somehow we have yet to have enough of our own selves. We don't possess enough of our own selves to be accountable, right? It's about that self-accountability. It's about the institutional accountability. It's about, as we listen to what young people are saying, we have to interpret why they're saying what they're saying, because the defund police doesn't mean no system at all. Mm-hmm. But it means the system has to be revamped and reimagined and inclusive of us having a seat at the table, especially young folks, because the young people are now seeing that they have to be the effort of constantly working out the mental muscle to not become your worst enemy through giving up hope is important, because as soon as you give up hope, then you become a part of the people who have the defeatist mentality.
Yeah. Ibi, in writing Amal's character in this fashion and taking him through this journey of when he's wrongfully convicted and going through, knowing that he's not who they think he is, and then transforming his mind and coming out on the other side, what did it give you as an author the opportunity to share with others that you're hoping that they too will have these same skills and developments that Amal had, but knowing the realities that, that might not always be possible or practical for some kids?
Well, going back to what Yusef just said, just to sum it all up, this is about going in. Young Amal had no other choice but to contend with himself, even at 16, in the same way that Yusef and the other young men had to do at such a young age. You are forced to constantly have conversations with yourself. So we're getting into the skin and soul of Amal to figure out what would go on in his head when he's accused of something that he did not do. He's self-reflecting over and over and over again. Depending on the thoughts, this can drive someone mad. Anybody. We've seen it. Depending on the thoughts. we were very intentional that Amal had some sort of salvation.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't come up with that out of thin air. That is inspired by Yusef and by me as a person. We often talk about growing up in New York City in the 80s and 90s. I was born in the 70s. I'm an immigrant. So I came to New York City in 1981 with my mother. I was 4 years old, but I only know New York City as a child, and I was very sheltered. But New York in the 80s, boy, as a child, we have different childhoods. You were allowed to play outside, right, Yusef?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the crazy part. Everybody played outside.
Everybody played outside. I could watch from a top floor window. But children played outside, but it was simultaneously rough. It was rough. It was the crack epidemic. It was racially segregated. People don't think that about New York City. And children were getting into some things that children shouldn't be getting into. But in the midst of all of that was incredible creativity and innovation.
Yeah.
And this is what Amal had. He had creativity already. He had something he worked on his art. He doodled. He was looking up artists. He was in an AP art history class. So he had something to work on to keep his mind free, as Yusef would often say. And this is for me too, as a New York City kid, an immigrant kid, writing was my salvation. I watched so much news as a kid, as a latchkey kid, that of course I wanted to be a journalist. When I found out that wasn't my thing, that, nonfiction became poetry and poetry became fiction and then children's fiction. So art has always been a way for me to make sense of the world. And we would want young people to know that it doesn't have to be poetry and it doesn't have to be painting or drawing. The way that they rhyme, Amal also spits out rhymes, out loud. The way that they put their outfits together, right? Humor and wit is also art. We would want young people to, what is it that you're good at, right? And what is it that you want to become better at? That's something you can always work on, and that's something no one can take away from you, is those skills. You might need some supplies here and there, but those skills that you have, that is your salvation through everything. And Yusef, you got to share the pants again, for the few people that are here, we don't do Black bookstores. So this is, I know Mark Lamont Hill is the owner or founder. So, you want to huh?
I want to see the pants.
I'm about to show them. But what I wanted to say about that whole idea of what art is, right? The outside of the box definition of art, right, is that we are all expressions of that. And I think that that's the beautiful thing that Ibi is getting at, that in the cadence, in the speech, in the thing that we've taken and repackaged, so to speak, and created in our creativity, all of that stuff is art. And the best thing about it too, I think, is that as people who care and understand that the young people are the future caretakers of tomorrow, we get the opportunity to understand that they are exhibiting their purpose.
Yes.
And so imagine a Kevin Hart not being given the opportunity to thrive as a comedian.
Mm-hmm.
He may have been, he probably most likely was exhibiting class clown activity and ideas as a youngster, right?
Yeah, that was demonized, right? Villainized.
Yeah, and then being put into, so to speak, a place that says, wow, you got something. Hey, you need to look at Richard Pryor and this and that and all of these other folks that then speak life into him and allow him to know that he's not crazy, that there's a reason for this. You look at a Dave Chappelle as another comedian, how he can sit on stage and do one of perhaps the shortest events, the most profoundest events of all times at the same time. These pants that Ibi is talking about are pants that I recently got back from my attorney. These were the pants that I wore on the night that this happened.
Yeah.
April 19th, 1989. Over 6 feet tall, flat top, with pants on, with art all on it.
Seems like you'd be easy to identify, huh? If you had all that.
And that's exactly why I'm saying that too. And as you can see, first of all, these pants have never been washed since 1989.
Wow.
And
I love
there's
it.
and there's no blood on them.
Speaking of which, I'm glad that segues into this system. See, I run an organization of over 500 people, 250 lawyers that represent people who cannot afford a lawyer and who find themselves in these situations. And it's often hard for many people to articulate the value of the human being when we're talking about their artists and their poets, right? Because what people see is, well, what have they done in the past? Have they gotten expelled from school? Have they had this or have they had that? And we begin to see that as a negative against them that makes them less valuable. What would you tell people in my position that are charged with the duty and responsibility of seeing an individual, but also inviting them into the space to participate? Because that is where we're at a standstill. When we can't show what we need to show, but what we need from the person, it's almost as if they're having a hard time describing what they believe they are. And so how would you help us in this moment to really do a better job at seeing an individual for what their value is, and also demanding more of this system to see them as well?
Wow. I mean, I think part of it is about memory. Part of it is about remembering. Like we have to have maybe micro Sankofa moments in self to remember our own youth and what we did as children and what made that real. And then look at the children that we are then the caretakers of in any position that we have in life, and understand that this is still a child. And I think that beauty finds its way in punching the air. You know, Ibi was very intentional, I would say, to make sure that we understood in the beginning that a child is born. That this is a child. Like America is the only place that they adultify children, that they have this concept of a juvenile, you know, even though this is a young adult book, right? But at the same time, part of, I think, the answer finds itself in us remembering who we were. But as we read this book in particular, this book is the answer. This book gives us the opportunity and the tools to reimagine and reevaluate and then redefine as well. Because the worst part is allowing for other people to define for your own self who you are. But as we begin to look at those definitions that have already been out there, we start looking at ourselves and saying to ourselves, well, maybe I need to straighten my nose and you know, straighten my lips and lessen my lips and, you know, bleach my skin, because the definition that's out there is that if you white, you all right.
That's right.
If you brown, stick around. If you black, get back. So the beauty of that negative is found also in the statement that our good friend Dr. James Baldwin said when he said that you know, to be African American is to be African without memory and to be American without privilege. And we, those of us who care, are trying to give back, are trying to understand, are trying to define this new thing that we are experiencing called change, so that we give all of us the opportunity to fight and win.
Yeah. Ibi, do you have any thoughts on that too? Because I want to say you're a mom, right? I'm a mom too. And so when I represent people, I put on the lenses of my motherhood, my mother hat. And we had a case that's what it took. It took for me to see this young boy like my son in order for me to narrate this. But there's a lot of system actors that didn't birth young Black boys. Never been around them, never understood them, never understood how a boy with a flat top and some pants like that could be a scholar or want to play the violin, because that doesn't look like those people that they're used to. So what do you suggest for people that are in this moment, in this system, trying to represent young Black boys for who they are, but may not be able to see them? And how can people participate and help those who have blind spots along? Again, you're on mute. I know it happens.
And you know, my children are here doing stuff. That's why I keep turning. I know, right? That mama's there. That mama's upstairs, right? This goes back to, you know, it's a symbiotic relationship between artists and policymakers, artists and attorneys, artists and judges. I really think one of the most powerful ways you can understand the humanity of a person or a people is through their art, is through what they create to express themselves. I don't know if anybody can go up to, you know, those Supreme Court justices, you know, that were recently elected by our current president, to say that, okay, Black people are human. That won't sit with them. That will go over their heads, right? There's a saying in education. It says, tell me, I'll forget. Show me, I'll remember. Involve me, and I'll understand. Mm-hmm. How do you involve? How do you immerse the most racist people among us in Black culture, in Black aesthetic, so that they can begin to understand? I think there's a lot of memory loss. You know, of course, James Baldwin passed away in the 80s. He's been saying these things since the 60s. You had Malcolm X in the 50s. You had the Civil Rights Movement. You had Du Bois and Edward Wilmot Blyden in the late 1800s. These scholars talking about Black identity, Garvey. You know, how long has it? 100 years now, right? And then we're still having these conversations. We still know these. So it's like we've been telling white people, but they forgot. How do you involve them in Black art? And it's one of those things that it's on an individual basis, so one by one basis. And I truly think, and I've seen it, I've witnessed it, I've seen it done. My daughter went to a progressive school, my oldest daughter. And one of the most magical moments I have ever seen in any school was watching about 100 white kids do African dance. I mean, real traditional African dance. They had a teacher get down with those kids, and that rhythm, boy, was down, you know, from their blonde hair down to their toes. They understood rhythm. And that instructor, professor, you know, master teacher told them that technique is a people's memory, dance technique. You know, here is what the hips mean. Here is what undulating mean for these people. That, you know, she couldn't tell them that. To watch them dance this and experience it with drumming, you know, and art. I mean, I know that those kids are forever changed and they understand Blackness in a different way than, you know, a white person reading tweets, you know, reading woke tweets. So that's what I have to say. Art, immersing a people in art. Maybe is there professional development for attorneys?
Yes, and that's what I was going to suggest. Honestly, you know, running an office of 500 people charged with the task of getting justice for Black and brown people, when many of the lawyers didn't come from that background. Books like this allow us to step inside of the right. But also, how do we spit it back out? And we're in a system where race matters, and this justice system does not see power lightly. You really need a moment of reckoning with the people who are in positions of power and authority, to reckon with their lack of understanding and their blind spots as it relates to fashioning justice for us. And I think it's time to do more than just have implicit bias training. You know, it's time to do more than say that, oh, it's okay, I don't want you to be uncomfortable, because fragility is real, but our demoralization has to come, you know, neck and neck with your feeling uncomfortable because I'm telling you that you need more learning and understanding. So yeah. I know I think they told us to go for about 35 minutes and take some questions from the audience. I don't know if I see any questions from the audience that I would like to bring forth. But if you do have any questions, please write them in the chat. We'd love to talk about them, because I really want to continue this conversation about the structure of the justice system. Because again, my office represents many, many people. We represent over 50,000 people a year. And me,
I have a question for you.
Oh, come on, because I was a part of this system and thought, maybe kids needed to come in for this. And I had to work to help them. And then I had to think, wait a minute, what did I do when I was younger? These very same things that I would never imagine would lead me out of my classroom in handcuffs. What would that do to me psychologically? And I would hope that I would have the resilience that Amal, the character in that book, had, or Yusef has, to overcome that feeling of unworthiness. So please, any questions, because this dialogue is so critical to what we're doing right now and what we're fighting for.
So, Yusef and we grew up in late 80s, 90s during conscious hip hop. I think we're all the same age, probably. Right. One of the first things he said to me when we started working together was that he was Black medallion, no gold. That was, and there was this dichotomy of conscious hip hop versus materialistic hip hop. And we both gravitated toward, KRS-One, Public Enemy. I personally like Brand Nubian and Tribe Called Quest. And there was, they were a little sketchy. What was that? X-Clan and all of that.
Love X-Clan.
But you remember that sentiment back then. And we tried to make an updated version of that sort of kid, that conscious, politically aware child in Amal. So what young people now, as I'm a parent to teenagers, and I'm trying to see how are some of these young people pushing the envelope in the way that we tried to do back then. And they're actually talking about abolition. They're talking about burn it all down because we don't know if this is going to work for us.
Yeah.
We don't know if we're not going to buy homes. We don't know if healthcare, Social Security, the safety net that my parents have is not there for them. And they realize that. So they just want to everything must go. Mm-hmm. Now, as, someone who's working within the justice system, how possible is abolition? Is it just conversation now?
Such an excellent question. Let me tell you, abolition is necessary, because if we don't have vision, we're always going to be stuck in the same place. But I'll tell you where that conversation is going, where the pushback is from the system actors, is abolition is reckless. Abolition is immature. Abolition won't get us the progress we need. Instead, it will have us all in havoc and fear. And we know fear drives politics and policies, especially in a criminal justice system. And what I say is that, I don't have the vision that these young kids have, because I've been stuck in my own world. I have dreams and hopes that this would do the things that the abolitionists are asking for. But I think that many people discredit abolition as a crazy idea, but so wasn't computers, right? The Jetsons were the Jetsons, right? What do you mean we can have things that, like cars that told us what to do? And guess what we have now? It's driverless cars. So I think abolition in this space is like innovation. And it is that place where we if we envision it, we can work to get to it, but we got to figure out how to weed out the detractors from that abolition, those that want to keep this structure the same because it benefits many people in society. And what I want to say last about abolition work is that it weeds out the bias assumptions, because cumulatively, when all those assumptions come together, they don't fan out for Black and brown people very well in this system. And as much work as we've done in reforming, we have never sought to dismantle the structural racism. We have never sought to dismantle some of the outcomes that we're seeing. So I think I'm with the abolitionists. It is time to think anew. It is time to say, start over. And that's a scary premise for people like me as well, but more so for people who want to keep this system the same.
Yeah. You know, the worst thing I think in the minds of the people is the need and the desire to keep things the way that they have been. And we are talking about the outgrowth of the criminal justice system being the new cotton fields of America. And to put it in a way that is very clear is to also understand that we are in a new America. This is not the old America that started where, you know, folks had to fight. I mean, they're trying to push us into that space, I think, where people are looking at civil war as an option, you know, and I think some places of the country have begun to enact that kind of dynamic. But I think at the core of it is the understanding that what are people saying? They're talking about fairness. But what do we know about history? That when you tell people to go free, you then become a threat. You then have declared an act of war on the system. And so therefore, if you become a Dr. King who, as certain folks have said, he woke up from the dream and began to talk about economics. And I think it was his wife who said that they killed him because of the economic plan that he had. When you tell people to boycott and to change and to utilize your dollar in your own spaces and to uplift self, you know, it's almost as if the idea of telling you to support yourself by buying, as they used to say, the black man's ice. They're telling you to buy the white man's ice, but ice cools at 32 degrees. The problem with that dynamic is that they are only giving us access to the same water sources that are funneling and fueling Flint, Michigan. You see what I'm saying? So we have to be able to own, and that's the other part of the conversation that they don't want to have, because there's a certain atoning that has to happen when you look at what happened in America. And there's a certain fairness that will never happen without a true fight, because the fight is, as Donald Trump so I was going to say eloquently said, but so disgustingly said when he was describing Charlottesville. He said there were fine people on both sides.
There's the wordplay.
Now, this is the thing, right? On one hand, you have, at that time, him talking about make America great again. And on the other hand, you had the then Proud Boys standing by. Of course, they may not have been known as Proud Boys then, but they're coming out of the woods with tiki torches, and they're talking about states' rights. Right. And those of us who know history, what that means, they knew that they were talking about states' rights to own people, being where America was, quote unquote, great again. And so now this new place that we're in, this new idea has never afforded people to even pontificate the concept of a female president, a black
one,
president, a black vice president. People are up in arms. Yeah. But this is America, right? And the absolute worst part is that we have to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that we have to live in fearlessness. Because fear is false evidence appearing real. It will stifle you. It will cause you not to move forward in your own purpose of life. Everybody dies, but not everybody lives.
Oh, and as it goes another.
We gotta live, as my good friend Les Brown says all the time. We gotta live full and die empty.
That's right. We have a question from the audience, and I think this is like dovetailing into what we're talking about, that the hope that this book is there for the long haul, for those younger generations that envision a better tomorrow. One of the questions from the audience says, sometimes I fear that books and messages like this one will mainly be heard by those who are already sympathetic to it. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of reception you've seen thus far and what you think it takes to really awaken a broader audience? Now, before you answer that, I'm going to tell you, I am going to have it in my office's training for my lawyers, for my social workers, for my investigators. to get a better understanding of what we need, the questions we need to be asking, and how people need to participate in their own understanding of who they are and showcasing of who they are. But for you, this book, and me and Dr. Salaam were talking about it, this work is the long haul. So can you talk about that question, and how do you think, you know, you can get more reception from people that are not inclined to understand the life that we're talking about from our lenses?
Can I speak to that as because this book is within the young adult literature arena. And when I started writing for young people, I had my mentor say to me, you're writing for schools and libraries. So for books for young people, we're not selling it to adults. You know, if we tell your audience here that this is from the perspective of a 16-year-old and it's 8 to 80, you might hear the 8 part, you know, or a 12-year-old and say, okay, this will be good for my grandson or what have you. And adults may flip through it and see that they're illustrations and poems and may not do a deep dive into it. So the idea is that children's literature is for children. So within children's literature, my industry is extremely white in the way that publishing is extremely white. So before this book gets into the hands of a Black boy, it probably has to go through librarians, and librarians are majority white, teachers, mostly white women. Before they get to teachers, they probably have to go through school administrators and whoever is responsible for budgets in buying several copies of a book, unless a teacher buys a few copies for their classroom. So there is this pecking order of who you have to go through to have a book like this get to the Black child. And we're wondering if they read it. Right now we get reviews and it's reviewed by white women who kind of gatekeep, you know, what books go into like districts or school districts or schools in general. So it's a hard sell for me. Because Yusef and I come from a certain perspective where we are talking abolition, yes, when there are people who are just getting into this idea of, wow, criminal justice system is really messed up, right?
Right?
So this is just, I don't have any answers. For me, it's been quite difficult because at the end of the day, we're still selling a product. And that product sometimes requires bells and whistles to get people interested, especially in young adult literature, where, you know, of course, this is not the only book addressing prison industrial complex that's come out this year. There have been others. However, I'm realizing that it's not enough that this is inspired by someone's real life experience, because to sell a product, it requires a little, you know, what is it that sells product? You know, sex sells.
Right.
When it comes to children's book, there has to be a commercial appeal to it. What is it that makes it fun? And we're not whippersnappers here, you know, and selling something to teenagers. So it is, I think we are reaching people. We are preaching to the choir in terms of talking about this book. But slowly but surely, we're reaching people who are curious. And that curiosity sometimes bothers me because it's also the white gaze and voyeurism. And that voyeurism is simply that. It doesn't move toward action, right?
Yeah.
Sympathy or empathy can be pity as well.
Yeah.
So it's a fine line. I don't know if we really are trying to reach the people who wouldn't care, because it would just be a great read. They put it down and that's it, right? It's people like you know, who will say, okay, this book is important. I'm going to share it with my colleagues. You already know the importance. Because you already know the importance, you have a product that you can share. It's something that you can, you know, pass on. It's a physical object versus someone who has no clue. It'll be a gift to a grandson, or they'll pass it on to, they'll donate it to the local library and move on.
Right. Well, I appreciate that, because I'm going to do my part to share this book and spread the word, because I really think that it does it speaks to us loudly in a culture and hip hop that we love, right? Because we see hip hop taking over everything. I mean, hip hop's in everything. White people love hip hop. So when we're using it as a freedom of expression, a freedom of understanding, I think it also should be equally loved in that vein as well. And so I intend to spread the knowledge and information about this book far and wide. But when we're talking about this as an abolitionist type of thing, I feel like we have replaced what abolitionists have been wanting us to do for a long time in terms of our civil rights with progressive. That word progressive and reformist allows us to inch here and there and give us a little bit of, here, you got this, and you should be happy with this. But we're speaking to this younger group that say, like you said before, that like, no, that's not good enough for me. Where do we meet in that middle? So we've got these two extremes. We got the conservatives, we got the abolitionists, and then we got some of the people in between. But how do we combine these two to move to a better place where our opportunities are not cut off right in front of our eyes, and no one bats an eye because it's so normalized? Even the Black people in this system allow it because it's so normalized. How do you allow people like, and I feel like I am powerful, but I'm only one. So how do you allow people like me to empower more people to stand up even larger than we are in this progressive moment?
Wow. I would say that we are not outnumbered. We are out-organized. I would say that the language, the connotative meaning of certain language uses disinforms us. And so there's too many of us who are accepting of the terminology that says that we are the minority. And I think minority, when you think about the connotative meanings, it talks about a child needing the ability of a parent to be there. It talks about not being a part of not having enough numbers, right? But I think politically it talks about not having enough power. And the crazy thing about it is that because of the process of voting and the process of using that most important power that we have, there's this concerted effort to make sure that we never really truly understand what that's about. I was watching this program the other day. Dick Gregory said that when he ran for president, he was the president for like a few minutes or something like that, because Pennsylvania alone returned 9 million votes for him. And they said there has to be a glitch in the system. And you think about all of that, right? Imagine having the ability to be organized. So organized that our unity has been said is more powerful than an atomic bomb. That organization there wouldn't be no need, I would say, for war. Because there's a certain fear when you think about organizing and what happens and what happened to our great leaders, right? But if we understand that as we've been playing the spooks who sat by the door, when we say, let's organize, and we come out of this to organize us, when the enemy then says, shoot them, no bullets coming out of no guns, they turn around and there's no one to heed the order or the call. That kind of organization is what we need, because it changes everything, right? It literally allows us, as our professor, Dr. Marimba Ani, who was a student of who's a protege rather of Dr. John Henry Clark, so eloquently said once, that if we decided that the system of oppression that we are experiencing ceases to exist tomorrow, it will cease to exist tomorrow. And that's the part I think that's important. Understanding what's at stake, knowing that it's not about turning our mind off and allowing for the system to do what it does. It's about full participation in our own selves because of the importance and the value of what that means. It's not enough to say, I got to get mines.
That's right.
Right? The crabs in the barrel weren't born there. That was not the natural habitat. And then as we see people leaving the barrel, we become, hold on, take me with you. And it looks like the crab in the barrel effect without figuring out, how do we chain up? How do we link up to get out of this barrel?
Right. Well, I'll tell you, and I think we're coming to an end. I see my, can you just give me some parting words of how we could be more helpful and bringing truths like this to light, but also using them for the very same organization and empowerment we need to give our kids the future that our parents looked at us and said, you're going to be better than me. I don't see that right now for my children. I've gotten certain opportunities, and now when I'm looking at my children, I'm saying, well, where do you go? And I want them to keep rising. So can you leave us with some parting words that how you want this book to be the catalyst for us to have that power, that collective organization?
Yeah, I think
I'm ready for it.
So one of the big things I think is imagination in such a way that we begin to, as I did when I was in prison, I used meditation and imagination to cause the law of attraction to be real. Because when I close my eyes and they say the imagination is the precursor of what's to come, and I imagined what I could be and what I could do, it gave me the opportunity to be like Neo in the Matrix and disallow myself to accept the definition of this box that they wanted to put me in, that the only thing that I had to aspire to was 3 hots and a cot. Right. And so I think part of the imagination collectively gives us the ability to, first of all, say to ourselves that we're not crazy. This book speaks in a language that gives young people the absolute understanding and desire of value, but it also gives those who care the understanding that they matter and we need to be pouring more into them so that psychosocially they know that they're needed and valued and their vibrations begin to rise, right? But when you marry that vision with the feeling of what you think it would be. And so earlier I was talking to a bunch of college students, and it was like, if you can imagine being at your graduation as a first year student, taking the tassel and moving it from one side of your hat to the next, being celebrated by the people who were there all along, telling you that you could do it. That makes you know, because you've already felt that truth that you know is possible. It allows us to look at the words that Les Brown said to me once. He said, we have to be able to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. That's because right. Part of what they are betting on is that we remain afraid.
Yes. Ibi, you have anything? Thank you so much, Dr. Salaam, for that, because I'm like, I got goosebumps under my arm. Under my sweat. I'm fired up. Ibi, do you have anything?
I'm just adding creativity to everything that Yusef said, imagination and creativity. And that doesn't mean just painting or poetry. It is envisioning a different reality for us and consistently envisioning that. That is part of imagination and that is part of creativity.
Thank you. Can I just say thank you for sharing your story with the world, Dr. Salaam, and thank you, Ibi, for bringing your masterful way of using words to empower. We fight for these things every day, and because of your story, it makes this household, what's become now a household discussion, more real, and we're able to get more justice incrementally for people. And I want to say that there's a documentary coming out about the Michael White case that fed off of. I used it in my closing, When They See Us, because it was about the wordplay that allowed the media to narrate this young man to accept that he was vicious and violent to accept the things that the system was going to do to him. And I saw him. And if it weren't for what happened to you and Ava DuVernay bringing it out in such a masterful way, that jury who had 8 Black women on it, I got to say that, wouldn't have gotten it and delivered justice. So that's coming out pretty soon. And it's really piggybacking off of a lot of conversations and discussions that we're having, planting seeds that this system needs to be stopped. So thank you so much. And Uncle Bobbie's, I want to thank you guys so much for allowing this wonderful opportunity and rich with information. I'm going to be taking this book back to a lot of people that are fighting for justice to help them understand how to fight better.
Thank you so much. Really, this has been a truly a touching and enlightening conversation. For all of our viewers, thank you so much for coming out. If you haven't already, please go purchase the book on our Uncle Bobbie's bookshop by clicking on that green button. I want to warmly thank our panelists. We have the co-authors, Dr. Yusef Salaam, Ibi Zoboi, and the Chief Defender, Keir Bradford-Grey. Thank you. It's an honor to have all of you.
Thank
this
you.
was a really great conversation. Thank you so much. Elevated. Thank you.
Keep going.
Last thing, punching the air is also about victory.
Yes.
Yes, because that's what we need, a happy ending.
Yes, yes indeed.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, guys.